While they're currently second in command in the Italian Mafia, the Genovese crime family is one of the most powerful and feared organizations in the world, with their reach extending beyond Italy to North America, Australia, Germany, Japan, and many other countries around the globe. But it hasn't been this way for very long. In fact, until relatively recently, the Genovese crime family was virtually unknown outside of Italy, where they were just another small-time mafia clan based out of the coastal region of Sicily. So how did they become such an international powerhouse? Well, that's what we'll explain right now. But before we get into it, hey, thanks so much for checking out this episode. So, like many other mafia clans, the origins of the Genovese crime family can be traced back to the island of Sicily. However, unlike other Sicilian clans, the Genovese weren't really linked to the local farmers or landowners. Instead, they made a name for themselves by controlling the docks in the port city of Genoa, hence the name Genovese. And although the Genovese had been active in the criminal underworld since the late 1800s, for a long time they were considered nothing more than petty smugglers. It was until the early 20th century when the American Mafia started to take notice of the Genovese and invite them over to the U.S. to do business. See, for decades prior, American Mafia had been run by 5 powerful crime families from New York. But at this point, all 5 families were starting to feel the effects of law enforcement cracking down on their lucrative bootlegging operations. With the supply of alcohol soon drying up, the mafia bosses were on the lookout for new criminal frontiers to conquer. At this time, word had reached the U.S. about the Genovese and their ability to smuggle contraband in and out of Europe with relative ease. As such, the American Mafia offered the Genovese an opportunity to expand their criminal horizons and make some real money by coming to the U.S. and running their own illegal gambling and prostitution rings. Now, the Genovese jumped at the chance to capitalize on this new source of income. However, with the transition came a major challenge, since the Genovese had primarily operated in the shadows of the Italian government. They didn't have much experience in the art of deception necessary to blend in with society and avoid detection. As such, the American Mafia helped the Genovese get settled in and taught them how to operate under the radar. Soon enough, the Genovese quickly learned the tricks of the trade and became some of the most successful mobsters in the country. At the height of their success during the 1930s, the Genovese controlled almost every major gambling and prostitution ring in America. They even extended their criminal enterprise into Hollywood, where they bribed studio executives to cast their members as bit actors in films. One Genovese member even claimed that there was a movie produced during this time that didn't have at least one Genovese member in it. And although their infiltration into Hollywood may seem minor compared to their other criminal activities, it was actually extremely important for establishing their legitimacy within the criminal underworld. You see, once people started seeing Genovese members on the big screen, it gave them this aura of invincibility that further cemented their reputation as being untouchable. But unfortunately for the Genovese, their luck wouldn't last forever. In the years following World War II, the younger generation of Genovese mobsters started to clash with the older guard. The younger members were becoming increasingly impatient with how slowly the organization was growing and wanted to take more risks in order to achieve greater success. Their patience finally ran out in 1957 when the acting boss, Tommaso Buscetta, attempted to put a young up-and-comer named Michele Greco in the hospital for stealing money from a drug shipment. To make matters worse, the police arrested Greco and sent him to prison, which he escaped from 2 years later. In retaliation, the younger mobsters assassinated boss Buscetta and installed Greco as the new boss, marking the first time an outsider had taken control of the Genovese family. Under his leadership, the family entered into a violent gang war with the rival Corleonesi family, which lasted for years and resulted in hundreds of casualties on both sides. This war greatly weakened the family and left them vulnerable to the authorities who had been watching the entire thing play out. Greco was eventually sentenced to 15 years in prison for his role in the gang war, which paved the way for the next boss, Anthony "Fat Tony" Salerno, to take control of the family. By this time, law enforcement had managed to infiltrate several levels of the Genovese organization, and they were able to use this intelligence to bring down several high-ranking members, including Salerno himself. This paved the way for yet another Genovese member, Joseph Massino, to take over the family. However, he would go on to become the most infamous boss in the family's history. That's because Massino was the first boss to turn rat, In the early 1990s, Massino agreed to plead guilty to racketeering charges in exchange for a reduced sentence and immunity for his family members. He then went on to testify against several high-ranking members in the family, including his own brother-in-law, Anthony Casso. Thanks to Massino's testimony, Casso was convicted of racketeering and conspiracy to murder, and he was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Obviously, this was a massive blow to the Genovese family. Not only did they lose a valuable member, but the family had just been humiliated by one of their own. Nevertheless, this wasn't the end of it. You see, Massino had also set up a secret recording in his house and recorded conversations with several other mobsters, including Casso, who had allegedly ordered several murders while Massino was boss. With this evidence, prosecutors were able to secure convictions against Casso and several others. And although Casso appealed the decision, claiming that the recordings were illegally obtained, the courts ruled that since the wiretap had been placed inside Massino's own home and was used against him while he was boss, it was completely legitimate. Not only was this a devastating blow to the Genovese family, but it essentially opened the floodgates for future undercover operations that resulted in even more arrests and convictions. As things began to fall apart, the remaining Genovese bosses tried everything they could to save what was left of the organization. They reorganized several times in an attempt to throw off law enforcement and continued to expand their criminal activities overseas. Unfortunately, however, these efforts would prove futile as law enforcement continued to crack down on the family with unrelenting force. In 2004, the FBI issued over 1,000 subpoenas to Genovese associates and their family members in an effort to dismantle the organization from top to bottom. And by 2009, 130 Genovese mobsters had been convicted on racketeering charges, which led to many of the higher-ups fleeing to Italy. Now, in most other crime families, if the bosses flee to another country, that would be the end of it. But the Genovese were determined to continue their criminal enterprise no matter what, so they appointed a new boss in exile, Liborio Arena, who would lead the family from his home in Italy. Meanwhile, the few remaining Genovese mobsters in the U.S. would operate under the guidance of a new consigliere, Daniel Leo, who had previously served as Massino's underboss. Together, they would work to rebuild the shattered remnants of the Genovese family and reassert their dominance in the criminal underworld. But unlike their counterparts in the U.S., the Genovese in Italy never really stopped operating in the shadows of the Italian government. Because of this, they were always more tightly knit and operated with far more secrecy than their American counterparts. As such, they were able to evade law enforcement for years, which allowed them to grow their criminal empire exponentially. Between 2012 and 2016, the Genovese orchestrated a series of brazen robberies across Europe, stealing over 300 million euros in cash, jewelry, and artwork. They even attempted to steal over 10 billion euros from the Bank of Italy, making it the largest heist in European history. Although they were unsuccessful in this endeavor, they were able to successfully pull off several smaller heists in other banks, which only added to their notoriety and reputation as being an extremely dangerous organization. By this point, it had become clear to everyone that the Genovese crime family had come full circle. They had started out as a small-time Mafia clan in Italy and exploded onto the American scene in the early 20th century, then fell from grace after being infiltrated by the FBI. And now they were resurfacing once again as a major player in the global criminal underworld, perhaps even more powerful than before. And that brings us to the Genovese crime family today. Under the leadership of Liborio Arena, the Genovese have become one of the most feared and respected organizations in the world. Their reach extends far beyond their native Italy, and their influence is felt in every corner of the globe. Although we couldn't tell you exactly what crimes they're involved in today, considering the secretive nature of the organization, it's safe to say that they're still up to their old tricks. Thanks for watching.